This is not a cash for kids case, and we hope somebody starts getting the message.
My kid's not here anymore. My kid's not here. He's dead because of him. He ruined my fucking life. I'd like them to go to hell and rot there, friend. No, you know what he told everybody in court? They need to be held accountable for their actions. You need to be. Do you remember me? Do you remember me? Do you remember my son? An all-star wrestler? He's gone. He's shot himself in the heart. You scumbag! You ruined my fucking life! I hate him! I hate him!
I want to start by sharing my deepest gratitude for everyone out there who has supported our mission to turn pain into purpose through our experiences of injustice in the United States family law systems. My name is Lilly Landikusic. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm a business owner of a large counseling agency that I founded about 26 years ago. And above everything, I'm a mother. And I'm an advocate, not by choice. And I'm also a survivor of childhood and family trauma and severe injustice in the United States family law systems. And I want to share about why we're doing this documentary, the mission and purpose, and why this message is so urgent right now. And the story came about from my own case. I had seen other cases, but until you walk through the walls of any courthouse in America in family court, and you've been a victim of abuse, you have no idea what these people are going through. So after I found myself in a high conflict family law case, I followed the process. I was in complete shock. And after years of feeling like you're in a meat grinder and just being told to follow illogical recommendations that are based on protecting your children from outsiders who've never met your children, and then seeing a cascade of your family falling apart and your ability to protect your own children being ripped away from you. And so this urgent message is so important right now, because at this moment, there are millions of children that are not able to access a safe and loving parent who can protect them. And in these cases, there is the influence of the family law system, which has failed its oath to do no harm. The mission and purpose of the documentary is to bring prevention and awareness information to prevent even one more child, let alone changes now. And as parents, we have the power to change it. We are a mass amount of dedicated and safe parents who have made a commitment to stand up for our own children. And we've witnessed firsthand the injustice, the tragedies, the permanent damages, and then going to a court system that has failed family after family, child after child. And now these children are growing up and they're becoming victims of abuse from repeating an institutionalized model that has removed the protection of the parents from their own children. That could be prevented from permanent damages, loss of a safe parent, having their innocence and childhood taken and basically sold to providers in a family court system. By design, the family court system pits parents against each other. When you come to it, it may seem like it makes sense if you're in a disagreement with your parent. But what you want to look at is even the physical environment of the courthouse, where you have two podiums, often two tables, definitely two parties. and they are in a holy war, sometimes to the death. The issues of the family law system right now are more urgent and timely than ever. I can say with full conviction from my experience after researching and experiencing the family law system that right now, if this story could save even one parent, even one child from going through some of the most extreme outcomes of the failures of the family court system, then this path is worth it and this story needs to be shared. It's my understanding that there's over 22 million families that have been blocked from a child, that they have legal, physical, moral, ethical, familial, spiritual access to, and that the family court system in its failures has created a machine or a maze that will dictate what the role is of your parenting, what your access is, what your rights are, what your constitutional rights are, if you can even hug your child, if you can even say, I love you to your own child. Who would think that this could happen in the United States? That we would have a court system that could potentially get it wrong, not just in one case or 1,000 cases or 100,000, but millions of cases, to have our judicial system get it wrong and often provide the child to the abuser in the case because of a lack of fact-checking protocols, policies, enforcement, protection, and a complete breakdown in the system. This message is so important right now because there are parents out there right now who can prevent what happened in my case and so many of our cases that have turned us into advocates, not by choice. And if this message can get out there to them, it can save a life. And the reason it's so important now is that we're seeing escalated statistics in every negative outcome of the family law systems. We're also seeing an increase in more extreme negative case outcomes like fatalities, homicides, suicides, even just custodial interference in most major cities has tripled in the last 10 years. So you want to think about that. Why? What is going on in the family courts where custodial interference, blocking contact, falsifying allegations, withholding, falsifying court documents, falsifying a child's name, moving out of state without permission, threatening to go to court. There's just a whole flood now in an industry that can be used to weaponize and take a child from a loving parent without them even being able to realize what's going on until it's too late. This documentary is to help prevent what is happening to so many millions of families right now for the next generation, and we can do it. I didn't believe it was possible before, but we started doing outreach and a pilot program. We started working with other international advocates using interventions, ideas, solution-focused models, and I've come to believe with all my faith and confidence that this is going to be overcome, that victims of abuse and trauma will be protected. And it may not be in the family court system. It may be through alternative models that are getting it right.
I'm Dr. William Burnett, and I'm a forensic psychiatrist, mainly a forensic child psychiatrist. And I've been working in the area of parental alienation for about 40 years. Well, I've done some research. I've done some basic research, but also I've written practice guidelines for how to do a custody evaluation. So some of that pertains to alienation. And I've been particularly interested in misinformation about parental alienation. So I've tried to discuss that and to some extent clarify it and refute it. Well, in the beginning, of course, we did not have a name for alienation. In the 1970s and 1980s, it was observed. I used to do child custody evaluations, so I saw a few cases where alienation was happening, but we didn't have a name for it. So it was only when alienation was named by Richard Gardner in 1985, people became more aware of it. So in the 1990s, Dr. Gardner and I were both involved in writing a practice guideline for how to do a child custody evaluation. And so parental alienation was mentioned in that practice guideline. This is published by the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. And so I think that was the first time that parental alienation was ever mentioned in a document that was part of an organization, an official document of an organization. So that was published in the 1990s. So I guess what happened as alienation became better known, it also became criticized. And people who were concerned wrote criticisms and kind of different ways to diminish the concept of alienation, because they were concerned that parental alienation was being misused in court. So that was maybe in the early 2000s. And then since then, everything has expanded on both sides of that debate. In other words, there have been more and more articles about parental alienation and more research and more books and publications, but there has also been more criticism that both the proponents of alienation and the critics of alienation have both become much more active, I suppose, in the last 15 years. So, of course, that has made it, in a way, more difficult, but also more important to get the word out. Well, I think it's a big problem because it misinforms therapists and evaluators, whether psychologists or social workers or psychiatrists. They become misinformed about the reality of parental alienation. And so they might not recognize it. If it happens right in front of them, they might not realize that it's happening. Or if it is happening, they might misinterpret it. And of course, I think the severe critics take an extreme stance. I mean, some of them say that parental alienation doesn't even happen, that it doesn't exist, or they use the word hoax. Sometimes they say that parental alienation was a hoax invented by Richard Gardner and promoted by other people. But that's an extreme position. Most critics agree that the basic phenomenon happens, that children do become indoctrinated by one parent to avoid the second parent, the other parent. So almost everybody, even among the critics, agree that the basic phenomenon happens, but they're concerned about it because they think it's sometimes misused in court. So that's basically where we are now. And that some specific aspects of parental alienation theory are criticized. For instance, reintegration or reunification programs are criticized because some people feel that they're not all that helpful, or that children even might be damaged in some way by a reunification program. Well, I think that happens a lot in science, that a person with a particular idea, some people don't like it and they get criticized. So that certainly happened to Gardner. I think the problem with Gardner's criticism is that some of it was just ridiculous, and that some people said that Richard Gardner was a proponent of pedophilia, for instance. That doesn't make any sense at all. And so I think some of it was totally unfair. Some of it was misinformed. They said, well, Gardner never published anything in a peer-reviewed journal. Well, that's not correct, because he did that many times. Or they say, oh, he wasn't really a professor at Columbia University, but he really was. So a lot of the criticism of Gardner was simply wrong. The criticism itself was misinformed. So that was sad, and I think it was hard for him to deal with that. But, he did fight back. He wrote articles himself in which he clarified these statements that people made about him. So he tried to get the honest information out to the public. Well, we tried to get the words parental alienation into both the DSM and the ICD, and I would say we were half successful in that we never did get the actual words in, but we did get an understanding that there are other diagnoses that can be used. And we've been told this by the leadership of the DSM-5 revision committee have told us that if we have a case of parental alienation, we can use their diagnosis, which is parent-child relational problem, which is an official legitimate diagnosis. And there's another diagnosis called child affected by parental relationship distress, or there's another one of child psychological abuse. So all these can be used if we have a case, and if we need to put a diagnosis down, for instance, on a report, we can put down parent-child relational problem, and that's an accepted DSM diagnosis. The use of a particular diagnosis depends on the nature of the evaluation that a person is doing. For instance, if the evaluation is focusing on the alienating parent, there is a diagnosis which is child psychological abuse, which is the diagnosis is applied to the person who's engaging in the abusive behavior. So that's child psychological abuse. If the focus of the evaluation is mainly on the psychological situation of the child, then it might make sense to use the diagnosis child affected by parental relationship distress. That's a very long term, but that's the term in the DSM, child affected by parental relationship distress. And you can see how that would apply to a child who is caught between two parents and becomes alienated from one of them. So that's if the focus is on the child. If the evaluation happens to be focused on the relationship between the child and the rejected parent, then it would make sense to use parent-child relational problem. And in fact, even the definition of that, the actual DSM definition, includes a phrase that describes parental alienation. It doesn't have the word alienation in it, but it does describe what happens in a parental alienation situation. So there are several terms, and the right one really depends on the nature of the evaluation.
I think the best advice is the same advice I think that's been given a lot, is that children have been essentially indoctrinated into a cult, like a us-them mentality with the alienating parent. And because of that, it makes them not receptive to really anything anybody outside will say or do. And so it's nothing, sadly, there's nothing you can do. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't make this happen. Even if, nobody's perfect. So even if you've made mistakes, unfortunately, the abusive parent is fantastic at exacerbating those mistakes to hide their own abuse. And in my talk tomorrow, I'll talk a lot about this, about how we can't keep focusing on what everybody's doing and focus in on what is the primary cause of what's happening. Because everybody likes to cast aspersions. They like to they like to throw smoke and say, look, everybody's at fault here. Let's stop pointing fingers. Well, we don't do that for other kinds of domestic violence when there's a coercively controlling, abusive person. We used to blame victims, but we don't do that anymore. We say that's a victim and this person's abusive. We need to do something about it. But that's what you're dealing with. where it's kind of like we've gone back in time and erased gender because we don't find gender differences in this. So it just means that you sadly are a target of a coercively controlled and abusive dynamic. And the other person has gotten control of the narrative, but there's nothing you did wrong per se. Usually the parents who do this at such a high level have a lot of pathology and you can't fix them. So sadly, there's sort of a double-edged sword about this, right? You're not responsible for it, so you can relieve yourself of a lot of guilt about it. But at the same time, it doesn't fix the problem because the problem needs to be addressed at a larger societal level. Well, since I started doing research in this field, there wasn't a discussion about it being family violence. There was a lot of discussion about it being child abuse. And so I knew it was bigger than that. The children are the kind of the victims, the unintended victims of this. And the focus was always on the child. And I get it. Obviously, you want to protect children, but that won't solve the problem. You have to look at the behaviors that are causing what's happening. And so when I started doing research in this area, that was my main focus. And it was interesting to see over the last 12, 13 years, how changing the narrative on that and refocusing it to focusing more on what the parents are doing to make this happen. That's when everything blew up. And the advocates and the extreme advocates of the domestic violence movement did not like that. Because it's saying that moms and dads could be abusive parents. Whereas historically, these advocacy groups have focused the narrative on being women as victims. And if they're doing these behaviors, they must be doing it to protect the parent. But yet they're excusing abusive behaviors, to protect their child. They must be doing that to protect the child from the other parent. But men are also victims of it too. And so that's incompatible with the ideology that a lot of the extreme advocates have. I'm not saying all advocates. I mean, I've always been a domestic violence advocate because I believe that it's not okay for anybody to be a victim of any kind of abuse. But I've been told I'm not a feminist just because I study this and a lot of other ad hominem attacks. Even though I'm a women's studies major, I'm as strong of a feminist as you can get. But these are not your normal feminists. Their brand of feminism is arguing for the status quo, that women should be victims and women should be dependent. And I don't believe that. I believe women should be equal. But yet they're constantly arguing for the status quo and not wanting to change what's happening. It's, because women are listened to more when they make allegations of abuse than men. If men make an allegation of abuse, they must be making it up or exaggerating. And so that's what we're dealing with now. It's a lot of old stereotypes and ideologies, and that's what's blocking progress. I think when you have unresolved trauma, you're going to have, for a large swath of the population, you're going to have major problems. These children have learned to just cut things off if it becomes too difficult or too painful. They don't learn how to work things out. They don't learn how to consider alternate perceptions and perspectives on things. They become very black and white in their thinking. And so they don't ever develop that kind of critical thinking that you need to be a functional adult. It's going to make it very difficult for them to function. And what we see in polarization at the U.S. politic level, for example, there's extreme polarization where people don't listen to out-group members. They only listen to their own in-group at this point. That's going to get worse because that's the MO of how people who've been traumatized in this way operate.
Is they cut off, isolate, divide. They don't tolerate, cooperate, collaborate.
Yeah.
Right.
And if anybody starts to then challenge them or be critical of their opinions, they will cut them off. And I think it's even worse it's a combination. I think we see it sometimes a little bit, this is my opinion. I think it might be a little bit worse in some individualistic countries like the United States, Australia, Canada, Europe, because there's so much focus on, I could do this myself and I don't need him. And I don't think that that is shared in other cultures as often. You know, there's more of a community focus. And so I think you have to learn how to get along with other people. And when you have a culture that values individuality and the child or person could just say, you know what, I can choose my friends. I can choose my family. Then there's no incentive to have to work it out. There's no incentive to have to try to push through the hard things and still maintain a healthy relationship with somebody. Even if you don't agree on everything, you can still have a relationship. You may not have to be that close, but you could still have a decent relationship. But I think what happens in our culture, at least very individualistic cultures, is there's this complete cutoff. And I feel like it's easier to do when it's something that you grew up doing and you don't know any other way of operating. When you start to then form a relationship, when these young people grow up and they try to develop their own relationships, they're going to be attracted to relationships that feel comfortable to them. It'll feel like a normal thing. But then when they realize how abusive it is when they become alienated from their own children, then it's a double whammy at that point because they realize they were alienated and now they're being alienated again. So that's the intergenerational component to it. I don't know the exact prevalence of it. I do know from my research, when I've done qualitative research, I'd say over half of people I've interviewed say that it happened to them. And they didn't realize it till they were older and had their own children. But I can't generalize that to everybody because it wasn't a representative sample. But I do know anecdotally, a lot of people talk about that they didn't know until they were much older and had their own children. And it was happening again. I think that's probably the most important part as a parent is you want to be healthy for when they come back around. And it's hard to stay healthy when you've experienced that kind of loss. But if they do, and if there's an opening to come back, you want to be in a place where you can receive them and not be bitter. Don't talk to them about what happened. They don't want to talk about it. If they do, just tell them the door's open. They'll come and I'm happy to answer any questions you have to give you my perspective on it. Not to tell you the truth. Don't tell kids that. Then they'll defend the alienator. Say, when you're ready, I'm happy to share that with you. But they never ask you. And if you feel compelled to try to explain yourself to your child, don't do it because you're only doing that for yourself. You want to do what they're ready to hear from you on what happened and, your perspective. And know that it's not an easy thing. Even when children leave a cult or when adults leave a cult, they don't just leave. They often go back several times. So it's not always an immediate, I'm out and I'm safe. So I think a lot of parents, they get hopeful when their kids come back to them and then why did they go back? Well, it's a natural part of, they're trying to separate and it's not a clean break. The web in which they're tied to their abuser is very strong. And getting them out of it, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of shame wrapped up there, and children can't contain that. It's hard enough for an adult to contain that kind of feeling. Children don't have the capacity to know how to do it, and nobody's modeling for them how to do it. So unless they have really good therapists who knows how to deal with those feelings, that kid's on their own because the abuser doesn't know how to do it, and they're often not able to even be present to care. So it's important to understand that it's a process to get them out, and it won't be likely an overnight thing. If they don't come back, just understand why. But if you're in the best place you can be to receive them, you need to deal with your own trauma about it, because how you're going to hold their trauma, how are you going to be the safe place for them to process that trauma? You need to be that for them. They're going to look for alerts all the time. So even though they might be reconnecting with you, understand that they have internalized this very negative attitude towards you. And they're going to look for any signs that might tell them that what they're doing is wrong. Cause they're not trusting their gut at this point, right? They're like, okay, I don't trust what my alienating parent is telling me. I might try to reconcile with my other parent to see if what they're telling me is true, or they want to verify it maybe. And their hackles are up, they're making sure that, it's kind of like an animal coming out of a hole trying to kind of see if it's safe, right? Probably the best analogy. And any little thing could scare them. I mean, not that you want to walk on eggshells. You don't want to do that either. You want to be as genuine as you can. But in order to be genuine and be able to hold your child's emotions when they do this, you need to be in the best place you could be. Otherwise, you won't be able to receive them very well. This is why mediation doesn't work in alienation cases. Domestic violence advocates have been arguing this for a long time. They say it's actually more abusive to subject a victim of domestic violence, coercive controlling abuse, to sit in mediation because the abuser is just using it to stall. They're using it to further get information to abuse even more. And that's intentional on the part of the abusive parent.
Right. It's
And we're talking
intentional,
about the
strategic.
same thing. I mean, these are abusive parents. They're just happy to use the kids. That's why it's an alienation, but it's the same. We're not any
Right.
different than what some of these domestic violence folks are talking about. We just happen to
Right.
recognize it could be moms doing it too. That's the only difference. And we recognize that the children could be used as weapons. We recognize that. They recognize it, but they seem to only think it happens whenever dad makes them a weapon, not when mom makes them a weapon.
My name's Robert Garza. I've been through family court for about 16 years. I am now pretty much an expert in legislation, false allegations, and basically reforming the family court. I've amended about 450 bills now. That's about 8 to 9 bills per state. And I've learned a lot in doing so. I've passed legislation in Texas, North Dakota, and most of these bills are about to go through all 50 states as soon as legislation starts in December. So I have quite a few bills. I have a new start at equality, which is 50-50 shared parenting. You have to be fit, willing, and able, and live within 25 miles, and that's pretty much it. And that's going to push, I think, all 50 states to have 50-50 in those states as soon as legislation starts. Another one I have is time taken, time back. And when somebody goes through a false allegation and that allegation is ruled out and there's no finding of abuse or neglect, then when they return the child, they shall return the time, the same type of time, and the same exact amount of time. So if someone misses a Christmas, then when they return the child, they'll get 2 Christmases in a row. And it disincentivizes making the false allegation. And it basically rights the wrong that the court did in taking your parental right away on a precaution. And so that one is really good. And it passed in Texas and in North Dakota. In Texas, it passed unanimous, bipartisan the first time, and the governor signed off on it on Father's Day. A lot of people weaponize what's going on in criminal court, and they'll try to get criminal charges on you or allegations and bring them over to family court and weaponize those, even though you've not been found guilty of them. And so after this bill passes, basically it will keep, unless you're convicted of something and found guilty, then they can't bring it over into family court, and it keeps it out. Now, if it has to do with children or anything like that, or let's just say a DWI, then you have to have a whole nother hearing on it to see if the judge will allow it in family court. And so in doing so, it stops a lot of the games that people just try to get false allegations against someone in a criminal court, knowing that they're going to be dropped later. A lot of people do that. One of the last ones that I wrote was parental alienating behaviors. And what that one does is if there's parental alienating behaviors found in your case, if you're the one doing this, which is like false allegations, interference with child custody, gatekeeping, bad-mouthing, if any of these behaviors are found to be in your case, then after this bill passes, that judge shall order you to pay all fees for all the professionals and opposing counsel. In doing so, it stops the behavior before it starts. Most of these things are done from attorneys teaching their litigants how to do this. After that, this is going to stop. So once my bills start passing through all 50 states, and even if they don't get passed, they're going to be talked about, and it's going to open up conversations on why they're needed and what all this abuse is about. And so I think once the general public has their eyes open to all these legal loopholes, they're going to see that family court's not what they thought it was. And I don't think it's going to take very long. I think we're at a big shift in it's a tipping point right now. And I think after January, it's going to just fall over, and it's going to open up a lot of people education-wise on what the family court's been doing. And they can't hide it anymore because of social media and because of all the advocates. I think the ways that my bills adapt for prevention is that it stops the behavior before it starts. The only way you can alienate a child is keeping them away from a parent for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, enough time for either the child to give up or to brainwash them or manipulate them. And the time taken, time back stops that bad behavior because it disincentivizes it, because when you return the child, you shall return the time. And in doing so, it gives you time to repair that parental bond that was broken by precaution by the court. The 3 strikes law literally solves this issue in a week. So if that wasn't there, you would have to go to family court. You would have to hire an attorney, $3,000 to $5,000, wait months, maybe weeks to, even several months to get into family court and litigate this for an enforcement action. With the 3 strikes law in place, that stops parental alienation literally within a week, because it keeps you in contact with the child no matter what. It's literally solved within 7 days. In Texas, we had problems with our judges giving 20 strikes. And so literally when you file for this enforcement and spend thousands of dollars to get into family court, and the judge just gives them a slap on the hand, there's really no reprimand for it. And the alienator knows this, and they keep doing it. So our judges weren't doing anything about it. So we came up with a bill that in Texas that literally says on the 3rd strike in family court that the person that is guilty of this goes to jail. There is no more discretion. The judge only has discretion on how long they're in jail. But as far as that goes, on the 3rd strike in family court, there is no more discretion, because the judges had a chance what they could have been doing. They didn't do it, and so we had to tighten that law up. So once these bills have been going through, I've gotten an overwhelming, happy, excited. People are starting to see a shift in family court, and people that didn't have any hope in it now have hope, and they can see where these bills are going to make a change, and so they're holding on longer. Maybe they're people that wanted to walk away aren't walking away. I've gotten quite a few just in the last couple of weeks of people that said, "Hey, thank you so much. You gave me hope. I was going to walk away. You told me to stay in there. I waited one more hearing, and now they have joint custody or something." And so, or primary custody, because they saw where they were alienating the child or something like that, some of these behaviors. And so I think these bills are giving people hope like I never knew. And it's giving them a reason to fight. It's turning their pain into purpose. And I know how that feels. I was a parent just like any of these people. I didn't go to law school. I was just a normal parent that went through family court, that saw the legal loopholes and wrote legislation to shut them down. I think professionals need to understand that, unless you've been through this, it's not a normal thing. It's not like your child went with the other parent and until we can investigate this. The parent is grieving the loss of a living child. It's like that child is dead. I don't think, actually I know, unless you've never been through it, you won't understand this. But if it's that hard for a parent, enough that parent will commit suicide because they can't see that child and that bond is broken or It's not even broken, it's shattered. And after about 30 days, the child gives up. That child literally splits. That child either has to believe that what the alienator is telling them about them, and that way they can distance themselves and hate that person rather than feel what they're feeling with all that hurt and pain of not seeing them. And it brainwashes them, it splits them. And if you can't take that hurt and pain as an adult, imagine it as a child and how innocent that child is. There is no therapy that I think in the world that can fix that. It may put a Band-Aid on it, but once it's broken, it's like shattering a glass and putting it together with super glue. Those cracks are always there. And the same thing, when that alienator does this to a child, when they even come back to your home, if they try to brainwash them and say, oh, your dad's abusive or your mom's abusive, if they see any type of behavior from you, like if you raise your voice, all of a sudden it triggers them and they go back into that, there it is, like you're the monster again. Like it's almost like a shift in your child. But these seeds that the alienator implants, no matter what it is, or if they say you don't drive safe, if the minute you get in the car, if you're not putting your seatbelt on, the child is already saying, please put your seatbelt on. Mom says you're not safe, da-da-da. They plant, and it shouldn't be that way. It's almost like watching Jaws and then trying to have the child go to a beach and have fun. They're not going to have fun. That's abusive. And that's what people need to understand, that parental alienation or any of this stuff, it's harming your child, that they're going to have literally for the rest of their lives and probably their children's lives, because they're not going to be the whole parent that they could have been because of what you did to them.
My name is Ashish Joshi. I'm an attorney by training, a lawyer, and I've been working with cases involving alienation for about 20 years, I would say. There are several parts of it. First of all, we have to differentiate between cases of alienation. It could be a mild case of alienation, and the challenges are different in that case versus a severe case of alienation. In a severe case of alienation, it's challenging for the parent to demonstrate to the court that the child's voice that the court keeps on hearing, rejecting the parent, is not the child's actual and genuine voice. That is the voice of the alienating parent, which is speaking through the child. So judges and mental health professionals and guardians ad litem are trained to respect the child's voice, give it the weight that the voice deserves. So part of the challenge is to demonstrate to the court that they would not be doing justice to the child by blindly respecting the child's voice without doing some investigation as to whether the voice is genuine. They are difficult to win. Like any case in litigation, when there is no guarantee. Litigation is always prone to risk. You are dealing with a human being at the end of the day, a judge, who may or may not see the way you see the things. So I don't think it's impossible by any means. I don't have statistical data as to whether it's more difficult or it's easier. But we see cases around the countries, not just in the US, but Canada, UK, everywhere, where courts do understand what is meant by alienating behaviors, and where they have found the evidence, not just allegations, but evidence of alienating behaviors, they have provided interventions. Not every case requires the change of custody. Not every case requires a specialized mental health intervention program. Not every case requires no contact between the child and the alienating parent or the favorite parent. So you have to have those nuances, and you have to look at the case from a holistic standpoint, not have this binary mentality as to whether it's alienation or abuse or estrangement. The top recommendation would be to understand that time is the enemy. Time is the enemy. The mistake that many parents make and lawyers make at times is to get drawn into the rabbit holes of arguing whether parental alienation is a syndrome, whether it's in DSM-5, whether there's scientific underlying basis for the theory, and all of those battles which you don't need to fight. The single most important thing, if you have a case involving alienating behaviors, is to get to the court and get a hearing, an evidentiary hearing, a trial, so that a trial judge can make findings of fact. Otherwise, you keep on chasing the ghosts and you keep on making all these arguments which go nowhere, and precious time is lost where the child and the parent could have gotten a good intervention. Well, I don't know why they don't. It's not that no one does it. Lawyers do go to court, do have those hearings. But oftentimes I see that there is this understanding or a belief that litigation is not good for the family. That in order to help the family or the child, it's better to stay away from courts and not get into litigation. It's adversarial, doesn't help anyone. And that's all good and true. But where you have evidence of alienating behaviors, you could have evidence of what is known as child psychological abuse. And in that situation, to leave the child with any help, without any help, to leave the parent without any help, is basically condoning the abuse. Because imagine this from a judge's perspective. A trial judge hears an allegation of parental alienation, but there is no trial, there is no evidentiary hearing, there is no opportunity to take evidence. And months go by, years go by sometimes, and lawyers keep on filing motions. The judge has no clue as to what's going on. At the end of the day, a judge needs to gauge and evaluate credibility of a witness. If a mother is making an allegation that the father is alienating the child, the judge needs to hear from the mother under oath. The judge needs to hear from the father under oath. The judge needs to maybe examine or hear from the experts if they are involved, an evaluator. The judge may also have to interview the child or obtain the child's preference depending on the age and the jurisdiction as to custody and parenting time. And then the judge has the complete view of the family dynamics and make a decision. Maybe it's alienation, maybe it's not, maybe it's something else, but you need the trier of fact to get to the bottom of this and make findings. Without findings, it's just allegations, just opinions. It's a great question, and I'm trying to think how to answer that. I cannot give legal advice because every jurisdiction is different. But what I would say to a parent who is representing himself or herself in the court is to go and ask the judge to schedule a trial or an evidentiary hearing. Tell the judge that you have evidence that you would like to offer about alienating behaviors. You have evidence to demonstrate that the other parent is acting in ways that is not helpful, that is harming the child, that is harming the relationship that the child has with you. You don't even need to use the term parental alienation. I mean, talk about the behaviors. For example, if one parent is constantly violating the court-ordered parenting time, if one parent is constantly interfering with your parenting time, if one parent is denigrating and bad-mouthing you in front of the child, these are behaviors. These are actions and omissions. So you tell the judge that you would like to have a hearing where you would like to offer evidence of this. And once you have that platform, then you can put a case on. Without that, it's simply just noise, and the judge is not getting the signal. You want to give the judge the signal, which is the important information, meaningful information. The noise is all the distraction and unwarranted information that distracts from the signal. Well, there are case studies and research studies that have shown the harm to the children, the long-term and short-term consequences of being alienated from a parent. So I won't go into the science because there's plenty of science so we can refer to and talk about. But what I have seen as a lawyer of children who get trapped in the situation and who are not able to get help, or children who get out of the court system because they age out, they are emancipated, they turn 18, and the court no longer has jurisdiction over them. It's this mindset and belief that they had a parent who was abusive. They had a parent who didn't love them. They had a parent who was unsafe. They had a parent who was dangerous. They had a parent who was incapable of showing them affection. And they have a parent who doesn't deserve love or affection from them. And it's that distorted and delusional mindset that they go out into the world with. And that has significant consequences. I've been in a position of working as a guardian ad litem, where I have to advocate for the child's best interests. So it's not that I've seen these cases only on behalf of one parent or the other. I worked in that capacity as a GAL as well. And it's heartbreaking to interview those children when they talk about these cases and what they have seen, what they've gone through. And you see this play out in a variety of ways. Some children, not all, but some, they internalize the guilt of having rejected a perfectly good parent. They internalize the guilt of rejecting a loving parent, and you see it being come out in self-harm behaviors, sometimes eating disorders, sometimes acting out in schools, violence, drug, substance abuse. So it runs the entire gamut. And children are resilient. They are very different. Even in the same family setting, sometimes you see one child being affected by alienating behaviors, whereas the other child appears to be not so much affected. So it depends.
I remember not being able to make sense of what I was seeing. A little girl about 4, and she would barely talk. And it took me a while. And after that, I just thought, this is the worst form of abuse I've ever seen in my life. It became very clear through the course of my work with that family that the mom was really influencing her. And she was at such a young age, it had an effect on her language development. It's the adamant, total rejection of a parent. That's the first red flag, because children and practitioners who work with children in foster care know this, that children still want to see a parent, even when a parent has been found to be abusive. They may want to see them with somebody else there, but they still engage in attachment enhancing behaviors with that parent. They still want to stay in touch. They still want to know that the parent loves them. They still enjoy getting cards from the parent. They still enjoy having a phone call with the parent. Whereas an alienated child will have a total rejection and a hatred. You know, I'm not so sure that the treatment is as much therapeutic as it is educational and legal consequences. So boundaries. And yes, and consequences, financial consequences to their behaviors, time taken away with their children. Those are the things that cause a behavior change for parents who are that disordered, to engage in that kind of behavior that would attempt to try and put the other parent into jail, or who would interfere in a parent's time by keeping the child with them, you know, completely violating a court order. There's a different level of pathology going on in those parents. And what works with them are consequences, behavioral consequences. So like one of the last things that an alienated child deals with is the shame and guilt that they hold at some level for playing a part in what happened to the rejected parent. That there's just the ability to look at that is very, very hard. And Karen Woodall has talked about this some. That it's kind of one of the last pieces of their work as they heal. You know, their healing process can take years. They can. Well, Yvonne Parnell was just talking about this, right? That they can reconnect with the targeted parent through an intervention, and they can begin to flourish. But then they see after about 2 years that they just kind of take off intellectually. They just sort of blossom. That it takes that long for them to really be able to move on. And I think some of that is when the children are old enough to know that they've cooperated in something that was not right. Sometimes a younger child is truly convinced that because they're young and they don't have a lot of years of experience maybe with both parents, or they don't have the cognitive ability to say, what you're saying about my parent really doesn't match that parent's behavior, right? They don't have the critical thinking skills to work that out. But an older teenager who's had, 10, 12, 14 years with a parent, knows what they're saying, and knows that one parent's trying to convince them. On some level, they know that. And so I think that there's a different level of guilt and shame for that older teenager, maybe, or even a middle-aged teenager, for participating. If you're going to reject a parent at that age, when you kind of know the difference between what your parent's saying and how the parent actually acted. If you're going to reject a parent, you're going to override your own critical thinking skills, right? You're going to give up your own sense of self, your own sense of reality, and you're going to take on the reality of your favored parent. That's going to become your reality. And in that way, you give up a piece of yourself. You give up your identity formation, which is one of the biggest developmental things we're trying to do in adolescence, right? Figure out who we are. We believe different things from our parents just to sort of try things out. We do all of that, push limits. We do all of those things to figure out what's our value system. And these teenagers don't do that. Yes, and legal professionals, with a lawyer saying, even 3 months is a long time, right? Even if it's been a couple of weeks or 4 weeks, a month, I'm usually saying you need to stop this right now. There needs to be contact. Yes, we can try family therapy, but trying family therapy and not having contact is not the answer. Or if you're going to try family therapy, give it 4 weeks. If people have not made a session every week and contact hasn't started in some way to show some progress, then it's not going to work. But in the majority of cases, that contact is the most important piece. I mean, that is one thing that we know clearly from the research, is that one of the things that can help this, one of the easiest things to do, is increase time for the rejected parent. The research shows that that's just increasing time will help the majority of the cases. And so letting that time lag is so detrimental. But it's very hard to get lawyers to, in their mind, they're thinking, well, okay, but that means if they don't agree, I've got to file for a hearing and we've got to go to court. And I'm like, yes, you do. Yes, we need to go to court. I'd rather see the court say, we have these warning signs. We've had interference with child custody. We've had the children reporting to the parent negative things that the other parent's saying. We're seeing transitional problems. The kids are showing resistance and going back and forth. And someone's got concerns that the children are being manipulated, or somebody has concerns that there's abuse going on, whatever that is, those red flag signs that we've got a high conflict case going on. I'd like the courts to say, let's get a pretty full assessment quick, be able to have that assessment done quickly so that we know immediately what are the behaviors that need to be corrected. That is early prevention. But I think that individual mental health practitioners don't always do a full assessment. If they're taking a client in for therapy, you know this, right? You fill out your intake form, you say what your presenting issues are, and then you go about a weekly session for a long time before you ever really might know all the details about what's going on. Sometimes one of the hardest things is if you're in a county where the judges rotate. So if you don't have the same judge and you're going back in for your 60-day review hearing, let's say you had one judge, I've had a case like this, you have one judge who heard the case for 6 months and made the changes that they needed to make, increase the rejected parent's time and got the right kind of therapy going for the family. And then the kids were doing better and the judge changed. We went in for a 90-day hearing and the judge didn't like anything that had happened, fired the whole therapeutic team, replaced everybody with new people. It was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. That family had spent so much money on therapy, on the guardian, on multiple court hearings. And then one judge just came in who was not, had never been in family law, had done a completely different kind of law, but was a family court judge, didn't know what it was they were hearing and changed everything. And the kids within a month were absolutely rejecting again and refused to go. Yeah, it was very, very sad.
My name is Dr. Alan Blocky. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist in Birmingham, Alabama. I've been working in the field of divorce and child custody and high conflict custody cases. I would say for at least 15 years, I've concentrated on it. I've been in private practice for 41 years. So there were times when I didn't do as much, but I would say for the past 15 years, I've done a lot. When you do high conflict custody cases, you come face to face with parental alienation. And that's where I came to first know about it. And that's why I've been involved in it, because it's such a central element of high conflict custody cases. And custody cases are super important because we're talking about children and their best interests and their long-term welfare. It's not to be taken lightly. And so when parental alienation gets in the way, I saw that over and over and over again in cases. And so that's how I got involved with it. I guess right off the bat, my recommendation would be, if you're going to get involved in parental alienation cases, you got to know your stuff. You got to have the background. You have to have the requisite information. You don't have to be the most knowledgeable person on the planet, but you have to have some basic information about it, or you're going to make bad decisions, wrong decisions. You're going to get confused and frustrated, and you're going to do more harm potentially than good. You have to become aware of what parental alienation is. You need to study it. You need to read about it. You need to go to workshops. You need to talk to experts. You need to read articles. You really need to become knowledgeable about it. I always compare it to surgeons, okay? If you have a surgeon who doesn't understand anatomy, how good of a surgeon are they going to be? They're not. They're going to be a bad surgeon, and they're going to do harm. This is no different. You got to know your stuff. Some professionals say, I can take on any case because I'm a professional. No, you can't take on any case. You got to be knowledgeable about it. You have to have the education, the training, the experience in order to take, especially these cases, because a lot of them are counterintuitive. They get convoluted very quickly. There are lots of professionals involved in the cases, each staking out their own turf. And if you're not really up to snuff on what we're dealing with here, you can feel overwhelmed and really make hurtful decisions. Well, Dr. Burnett is a giant in the field. I mean, not only has he written great books, but he started the Parental Alienation Study Group. He's one of the top 2 or 3 giants of all time in this field. So there's nothing more I need to say about it. And let me just say one other thing about him. One of the good qualities about Bill, one of the great qualities about Bill, is that he's an active mentor. You know, he didn't know me from Adam, and yet we've worked together. And he's done that with many different people. So he's collaborative. He loves mentoring younger people, slightly younger people. And so he's giving of his time and of his energy. So he's a fantastic giant in the field. So Dr. Burnett and I have written probably 10 or 12 articles together. We've published them. One of them is in the Michigan Family Law Journal. Some of them are in what I would say are mainstream media kind of things, newspapers. We've published a number of things in Psychiatric Times. So we've collaborated on a number of different articles in a variety of different journals and outlets. We also just finished writing a book that will be published by Charles C. Thomas, publisher, probably, I'm guessing, January or February of next year. So it's done, and so we finished that. So we've been writing together probably for 3 or 4 years. Dr. Burnett's 5-factor model and Dr. Baker's original sort of 4-factor model, that whole model is critical because it's the first time we've really had diagnostic criteria that are based on observable, touchable criteria. And so that's why the 5-factor model is so important, because it's really the only criteria that we've ever had. And it's great because all 5 factors have to be met. So you can have 4 factors, but if that fifth factor is not met, you don't make the diagnosis of parental alienation. So it's a very clear model. It's easily understood. It's based on behaviors. There are no assumptions to be made. It's observable behaviors, and it's the best criteria we have. The 5 factors are, the first factor is that the child has to either be refusing contact with the parent or resisting contact with the parent. The second factor is that there has to have been a prior positive relationship between the child and the rejected parent. Regardless of what the alienating parent might claim, if you can document that this child and that rejected parent had a good relationship at one point, that meets factor 2. Factor 3 is that the rejected parent has not engaged in abuse or neglect or what we say seriously deficient parenting. So catching parental alienation when it's in its mild stage is absolutely the best. It's like a lot of different things. You want to catch something early on as opposed to when it's developed into something moderate or severe. So that's a rule of thumb for sure. And I know parents who have contacted me who are, I'm thinking I'm part of parental alienation. I don't want to believe it. I want to give my other parent the benefit of the doubt. And it's like, the earlier you can figure it out and try to deal with it, the better. So that's sort of the rule of thumb about that. Yeah, I don't know that there's pushback about using the diagnostic tool. There is pushback to parental alienation as being a real diagnosable condition. That's the pushback. My view of the pushback is this. The people who are anti-parental alienation have an agenda. They have an ideology. They have an advocacy. They're being advocates. And they're disavowing and really refuting the science that's out there. Dr. Burnett often talks about adversarial collaboration, which is where we extend our hand. Let's talk and collaborate and come to some new understanding that we're both happy with about parental alienation. And they refuse to collaborate. Well, why would they do that? Because that means they're just stuck. They want to be anti-PA. And they want to be anti-PA, in my opinion, because they have an ideology that they won't budge from. And their ideology is, we can't admit that parental alienation exists because we have to stay razor focused on domestic violence by men. So I would say that I probably have been one of the naive ones who always thought, everything in the world is based on science. And it's not. This is a clear example of where the science of parental alienation is clear, The foundation is there. There have been more than 220 peer-reviewed, researched articles. There have been over 1,000 books, chapters, articles written. The science is growing every day. It's there. And yet, the people who push back on parental alienation have really captured the mainstream media. They're much more apparent than we are. And they've captured some big-time decisions politically. And it's been disheartening and disillusioning.
My name is Joshua Marsden. I've been studying alienation since about 2020 at Colorado State University under Dr. Jennifer Harmon. That's where I got my start. Suppose my expertise in it is I've published a couple articles. I assist other people in the development and their research. I just this year started helping training clinicians, educate them what parental alienation is, and then being contacted by attorneys to be retained as an expert or consultant on cases. And it's kind of where I'm at right now. So the adverse childhood experience, it got its start back in the 90s, and it just blew up. Very prolific. They have studies that looked at over 500,000 people. And it's a very well accepted scale, a way to assess childhood, negative childhood experiences and how it has this long-term impact. Not only that individuals who experience adverse childhood experiences probably cost North America and the UK about $1.3 trillion a year in lost wages, health expenditures, and hospital visits. So it's accepted by policy, it's accepted by advocates, it's accepted in the family court. And parental alienation, some people find it controversial, some people don't want to touch it. So Jen brought me on because she had known of some previous work I've done on ACEs. And she said, hey, this may be a way in. And I agree with her. If we can show that parental alienating behaviors are just as damaging and have correlations that we find in ACEs, then this is a way for us to get it out there so that judges, policymakers can say, hey, this is something serious. The ACEs looks at 3 domains. We see there's abuse that can be physical, emotional, that could be sexual abuse. In parental alienation, we see a lot of emotional manipulation. So in that first domain, we see that captured. Additionally, we see that there is another domain of neglect, physical neglect and emotional neglect. And lots of times we see these parents, whenever they're causing their child to be alienated from the other parent, they withhold emotions from them as a punishment or give it to them as a reward. So there's a second place that we find it there. And the third domain looks at family dysfunction. And as we know with parental alienation, it causes a lot of family dysfunction. So a lot of the parental alienating behaviors that we see that could fall in line with the ACEs is making a child terrified of the other parent unjustifiably, altering the child's identity by saying they're not a part of your family, they're an enemy. It could be manipulating the way they see the world. We call that a corruption of reality. They no longer see things correctly. And I think a big one is using emotion and using manipulation to punish the child when they don't all go along with the alignment. And sometimes we even see that they use other forms of abuse in conjunction with alienation to reinforce it. I want to start from the back and work my way to the forward. So you said the child would just be fine. And I hear that where sometimes lawyers don't get it, clinicians don't get it, and they say the child will figure it out, the child will be fine. And we find in severe cases, children don't. And what happens is they age out of the court system and the court's no longer involved. And whenever children do find out that they're alienated, if they ever do, it's usually when they're almost in their late 30s, 40s, or even later. The long-term impact, there's been several studies that see that there's increase of depression, anxiety, difficulty maintaining jobs, with relationships, forming trust. And my most recent search, I'm looking at the effect of how it divides siblings from each other when one sibling's alienated and the others aren't. Because an alienated sibling thinks that the other parent is all bad. And if this other sibling is still okay with that parent, Now you're the enemy because you're with the enemy parent. And throughout their life, this child who is being rejected by their sibling for having this relationship, they lose their identity, their sense of self. They're no longer part of the family. They're being harassed. They move on their own. They have trust issues. They find themselves in abusive relationships. They don't have a family resource to support them whenever they leave these abusive environments. And so, yes, I am finding this long-term impact. Well, one thing that I see in my research, it's still ongoing, is that, for example, I had one case where the older siblings were alienated from the other parent from, I believe it was the mother. And the youngest brother, he still liked mom. He still loved mom, and they would bully him. And this is what they'd say. They would say, I would bully him. I would tease him. I would say that mom's a bad person. He shouldn't be with mom. And we were relentless. We kept doing it again and again and again until he finally said, I'm done being bullied. I'm done being pushed out. I'll just agree with you. And it grew and it grew and it grew once he gave up, that he eventually became alienated. Then these children, this person, they became an adult. They realized, hey, something's wrong. I need to hear mom's side of the story. So they went and started meeting with mom. They invited the younger brother. The younger brother says, I don't want to, okay, I'll go with mom because I'm going to punch her. But then when he shows up, his heart melts. They reconcile with mom, and then mom ended up dying. And the younger brother never reconciled with the parent. And now not only do we have this younger brother who has that permanent loss of relationship, now we have older siblings who were manipulated into alienation feeling guilty, and they have this lifelong regret that they can never fix this damaged relationship now. The hardest part for me, and I don't know if this is the same for everyone, is trying not to get too close or pulled into it. Whenever I talk about it, present on it, I find myself welling up with emotions that this is real. This is tragic, and sometimes it can be quite triggering. And I don't know if you feel comfortable including this in your documentary, but there was one study where they weren't the alienating child. They were being pushed out and treated differently, but their older sister was severely alienated, and they experienced what we call parentification, where she was treated like another parent and a spouse. And it was so enmeshed and so incestuous that the father and the older sister started going to marriage counseling together and sharing intimate conversations with each other in marriage counseling. So that can be really hard to research and see that it's happening, but we need to know it's happening so people know that, hey, this is serious and we need to fix it. There's several reasons why it happens. Lots of times we see this identity fusion, and the child's identity gets sometimes absorbed into the alien parent, and it's us against the world. And so that causes them to be isolated from other people. So then the parents saying, you're my confidant, you're my equal, I'm going to share things with you, which they shouldn't. Then they use it as a strategy. If there's other children in the house, they use the sibling who's parentified to help them alienate the rest. So not in my research, but what I teach. So I have been invited to guest lecture at the University of Malta on parental alienation, as well as I lecture at Colorado State University. And the topics that I focus on is what is good science? What is quality science? And how do you recognize good science against bad science? And I always tell people, whenever you look at the research on this topic or research against this topic, look at, are they willing to be open and transparent about their data and their research? Also, look to see if they may have potentially engaged in questionable practices. I tell my students, doing a research is like having a recipe, and you need to write down all the steps and all the ingredients so that other people can redo your study. And if that's missing from a study, what are people hiding? So when you look at research that talks bad about parental alienation, try to find out, what are they hiding? Did they do good science? Are they willing to share with you their data? And if they're not, why not? And so the biggest advice that I would like to give is to learn to be good consumers of knowledge. learn what science is and what science isn't and what is good science. And that is not something I can cover in about 2 minutes, but I'm always happy to educate more on that.
Courts are a scam. Joe Sorge's message with Divorce Corp is that we're living in the Stone Ages, and it's run by a financial, a corporate cartel, all in collusion with one another. Lawyers, investigators, custody evaluators, and judges who get campaign donations from this group, that they make so much money from the adversarial system of people who are suffering, so that you have a system that is not designed to protect the family or the children. It is designed to make money and exploit financially the participants to the largest extent they possibly can. And you don't need them. The only person you need ultimately is the judge. And he gets paid through taxes. He and she get paid through taxes. But everyone else, the business people who do it for a business, are parasitic. Now, there's very good people. Lilly Landikusic, Lil, you're a perfect example of people who want to make it better, and I certainly want to make it better. So, I don't think I get my time or barely my expenses back in what I produce, deliberately so. There is another policy, universal, United States, across the globe, and it incentivizes conflict, bad behavior, and an exponential increase in traumatization. And that is every DA, every criminal system said, you know what? People lie in family court. They just do that. But we're not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Now, when you know there's a crime being committed, perjury and false allegations, and you don't enforce it, you don't enforce the penalties when you know someone did it, or when a judge is a fact finder can make a ruling that this occurred. It's called collateral estoppel, res judicata. You don't even have to prove it a second time. If the judge sees it and makes a finding on it, you've already got the person red-handed. To ignore that and to not call it out or reduce it into a judgment and send it right over to a DA, incentivize it. Could you imagine if there was no penalty for theft? If you were allowed to ravage a household and steal everything in it, and they just say, well, people commit theft. It just happens. But that's exactly what's done when a spouse or a co-parent destroys another co-parent and there's no sanction, even though the system knows it happened. The best advice I have for a parent is parent as if your child is having an out-of-body experience, and it's not the child. It's actually acting through puppet strings of your spouse who is just trying to hurt you. So you really have to focus, and you really have to not take that personally. And my take on why alienated children then become alienated parents is because you are stripped of the countermeasures. The countermeasure when you're facing parental alienation, it occurred to me that when I had time with my son, I didn't know the next time I was going to see the child. And it probably came from Dr. Warshak. Maybe it was some instinct. But I said to him every time, I know you're going to get pressure because mom does it on the phone. You can't go wrong with me. You can't do anything wrong. Because I know you love your mom. Don't you ever forget how much I love you. So if you say something wrong, no, it's not from you. When you're with mom and me, and she tells you you have to say something, you survive, you do what you have to. I will always be there. I will always fight for you. And if I don't show up one weekend, I want you to know I'm spending every minute to fight to make sure I maintain that right to see you. So don't you ever feel bad. Don't you ever feel guilty. You are not under stress. You do what you have to do. You say what you have to do. And I know you remember that you're right in my heart. You'll keep me there no matter what she says, no matter what you do. I'll always be fighting for you, and I know where it's coming from. What the lawyer knows, you can learn in such a relatively short time. And one thing an estranged parent or an alienated parent out of custody who's being alienated, they have time because they've lost their enjoyment of life. They can't sleep and they can't enjoy pleasure. But one thing that you can do is educate yourself, because in a short period of time, there's enough free online resources for you to teach yourself everything your lawyer knows. What the lawyer knows that you'll never know, or that you won't know unless you become a lawyer, is the judge, all the employees of the courthouse, the members of the bar association, all that. So one thing that you need a lawyer for is a lawyer is in essence a lobbyist. I say it's a way, when you're out of custody, make a documentary of your entire family tree. Because while you're waiting for that judge's decision, or while you're waiting for that custody flip, God willing, to everyone listening to my voice, I hope that you reconcile and find your way back. But in the meantime, get closer to your own family and think of a way to communicate with your child by creating something that will last well past your death. And I watched these videos. I think I watched each one that I created 50 to 100 times each, from beginning to end. And I feel closer to the departed, these people who sacrificed for me. And then I go thank them by making this tragic mistake in my own life. But hopefully that I can share this and other people can realize what a gift they can give their child, even when they're not seeing that child nearly enough. It's a way to communicate, break that wall, break that distance down. Because, you don't get to hug your child every night. You don't get to say, I love you, and you don't get to hear, I love you. You can still show it.